What is going on, YouTube? So today I'm going to do a mix breakdown of my song The Artist. It's kind of long. It's like this instrumental sort of like odyssey, like EDM mixed with like orchestral elements. So I'm really only going to cover like 2 sections, and these 2 sections have like most of like, you know, the main elements. So this will give you like a good idea of like how I mix the song as a whole. So here's the first section I'm going to cover. Yeah, so that kind of gives you an idea of like, you know, this sort of like, you know, vibe of the song, and, you know, how all the elements kind of like play into each other. So like, yeah, this was kind of a lot. I'm not gonna lie, it took me kind of a long time to mix because of how many elements there were. But the first thing I'll talk about is kind of like these nylon string guitars. So with this sort of like nylon string guitar sound, so it's actually a bias amp. For some reason my license isn't working right now, so it's gonna kind of like turn on and off for no reason. But it's just an acoustic simulator on the bias amp, and, you know, big thing with this was to kind of like, you know, get the sort of like dynamics of it right. So there's a little bit of, I just used Neutron kind of like sculptor to kind of like bring out, you know, some acoustic guitar, I guess, characteristics, and then, you know, bring out a little top end, you know, adding a little bit of a transient shaper, I guess, just to make, I think the attack was a little bit too much, so I added a transient shaper on here to kind of like smooth it out. A little bit of like, you know, an exciter to bring out some more harmonics, you know. And then I have a compressor that's basically just like compressing it, because these sort of notes were very kind of attacky, so I wanted to do everything I could to kind of, you know, take care of that. And then another compressor on top of that just to like, you know, make that process, and yeah, just take it and like kind of double it. But and then I have, you know, I added, you know, a boost around 8K to kind of just add some, you know, some more like top end niceness to it. It's almost like bite, that's why I didn't do too much. But yeah, and then I have an EQ on here that just kind of like reacts to the mid-range when it's too much, and reacts to some of this as well, because I guess that's a little bit of like brittleness. And then I have Soothe on here, basically taking care of some of those like bitier areas. Yeah, and then a virtual tape machine. This is a great thing if you're trying to like add more warmth or body to your, you know, anything really. So like, didn't go too overboard with it. And then our compressor, basically just like adding more compression to it and really just kind of like tucking it into the mix. I have a guitar reverb, so like before I actually even sent the guitars to the reverb, I have this like kind of multi-band compressor taking care of a lot of this stuff, because sometimes like you want to do things before you actually get to the reverb. Like you want to process the reverb signal before you actually even get to the reverb sometimes. So what I did here is I kind of like tamed the top end so that it wouldn't like, you know, create these like big percussive loud like, you know, sounds that were gonna like, you know, make the reverb go crazy. So yeah, C4 before the reverb, and then I used this sort of R4 just on a classic guitar hull, I guess, like a darker guitar hull, because I didn't want to clutter up my mix with any more high ends. And then, you know, I sidechained the guitar to a reverb. I sidechained the guitars to a dynamic EQ on the reverb that's ducking down these frequencies in just the mid band. So yeah, you have like, you know, your mid channel, which is everything that's in common between the right and the left in the middle, and then you have your sides channel, which is like, you know, that differing information on the sides. So everything that's kind of in the middle, I kind of wanted to like, you know, duck down in the reverb so that the reverb would create some space in the middle in those kind of like frequency ranges for the guitar, so that it didn't, you know, clutter the guitar. So that's what I did here. Yeah, and then I have a guitar delay as well. That's like literally just the same idea, just adding a little bit of delay to it. Nothing crazy. Always do ping pong delay. That's nah, forget what I said. The reason I guess I didn't do ping pong delay is because there's already guitars happening on the left and on the right. So, I think that adding a ping pong delay would just kind of like clutter up those rhythm guitar, sides. So, yeah. And then I guess, what I do is I sidechain my guitars or whatever is going to that delay to the delay. That way the delay doesn't get in the way and it kind of like comes up when that element is, not present. So check out what that looks like. So you see how the delay is kind of like it rises up after the note finishes, and it doesn't get it, the release time is slow because like, if it comes up too quickly, that can be kind of jarring. So like, yeah, have that kind of on a slower release time. Yeah, so that's it pretty much for the guitars. The only thing that I didn't really mention is that like, double the guitars and pan them hard left and hard right. Don't ever duplicate because that's not going to do anything. It's just going to make it louder. So yeah, double it and pan it hard left and hard right, and you'll be so happy with how that sounds. So for the strings, I basically just like compressed them and didn't do a whole lot. I like to like, stack compressors on top of each other. So it looks like I have a couple of compressors. This is the plug-in chain for the strings. I have like an EQ kind of like, taking out some. The reason I took just the left channel is because these are kind of like divvied up into like, you got your bass in the middle and then you have like some rhythm strings over here and then some other strings to the right. So I think that some of the rhythm strings to the left might have been too heavy in the mid-range. So I ducked that down a little bit, added a little bit more of warmth to them. Yeah, warmth around like 160, 170 is usually pretty clutch. And then this is what the compression's doing. I like to stack compressors just to keep things transparent. Like, when something is dynamic sounding, like these strings are obviously like really dynamic. They're doing that like dun 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 dun. So that's cool, but like if that's too dynamic, then those lower notes aren't actually gonna like stick out in the mix enough. So like sometimes when I add compressors and I don't do too much, it can actually bring that sound up as a whole without, squashing the illusion of those dynamics. So that's kind of like what I was going for with this LA2A leveling amp. Yeah, so you still kind of get that sort of like string, sort of like, really, really a dynamic string sound. It's just a little bit more in the mix and it's not poking out as much. So, yeah, that's what I like about that. So with my 808, basically I have, a lot of processing on my 808 to kind of make it, bring the tail out, bring out a lot of kind of that mid-range from it because it kind of was lacking a little bit. So I just have, let me turn off all the processing. So I just have my bass rider. So bass rider is great because when you have like different 808 notes, a lot of times like they're not all going to translate evenly because like, you'll notice this when you're in your car and you're like, hearing a song and the really low 808 doesn't really, you can't like hear it as well, because like obviously like bass it's hard to get it to translate linearly in like, systems like, like good studio subwoofers are really good at like, having the bass come through like kind of linearly, but a lot of systems aren't. So that's why I have this bass rider to bring that kind of low note up. So that's what's happening here. You can hear that really low note gets brought up by the bass rider. That note right there, that gets brought up. So that's kind of what I use the bass rider for. And then the CLA 76 brings that tail out a little bit. Well, actually, it compresses that note a little bit and then kind of like, it comes back to normal. Because I guess, you do have to be mindful of the fact that like on a big system, that note's going to be ridiculous. So, but still that kind of like, it's a nice middle grounds. And then, yeah, with the Pultec, I kind of brought out some, or I attenuated some 60 hertz because I knew the kick was probably going to be around that area. So I kind of, took some of that out. And then R bass, I brought out some of that 120 to give it a little bit more like warmth and kind of upper bass sound to it. Yeah, like you can hear what it sounds like if I drive it. yeah, it kind of just adds a lot of that, like, you know, upper bass, mid range to it. So, and then I have another bass kind of adding some like boominess to it, I guess. I kind of just use a bunch of R basses. This is a trick I got from Dave Monterello, but like, yeah, stacking on the R basses to make sure that it's like really even. So that like real sub sound. So if you look at it now using like a fab filter, like a Pro Q, just to kind of look at, you know, how the bass is showing on a frequency spectrum, it's like, it's nice because it has like kind of like those upper harmonics to it, thanks to like, you know, the R basses and stuff like that. So yeah, and then I added this kind of octave up bass, and I just did the exact same thing to it. Yeah, that's how the bass sounds. And aside from that, what I do with the kick is, so this kick is obviously like a little bit different sounding. It's a little bit more like clicky. So I actually like cut out some of those low frequency sounds, because some of that like sub, like I didn't actually need. Well, you don't really need anything below like, you know, 20, 30 hertz, just because like, you know, humans can't even hear that low. But like, definitely don't need it from a kick drum, because the 808 is really carrying that low end. And then I boosted 60 hertz to give it a little bit more like, you know, low end thump to it, and you know, hence why I attenuated that in the bass. And then I boosted, I guess, 130 just to give it a little bit more punch. And then yeah, that's pretty much all I did to that. And then I used the distressor to really bring out, yeah, I really just compressed the fuck out of it, it looks like, just using this distressor. So here's without it. Yeah, just adds, it really brings that click out. That's one thing that compression, one of the biggest things I try to get out of compressing my kick is that it really just brings that sort of like, you know, clicking, or not click, but it brings the attack out a lot. And I added some distortion to it to bring like, you know, some more harmonics into the picture. And then, yeah, it just kind of makes it really poke out in the mix. So oftentimes I'll actually reach for, you know, transient shaping before compression, just because like, you know, I can usually get the sound that I want out of my kicks faster using a transient shaper than I can from compression. And it's usually like more the sound that I want. So what I'll do is I'll bring the attack up and the sustain down if I want a punchier kick. Just tightens it up. That's kind of what I was going for. Like, you can hear, I'll overdo it just so you can kind of hear it. Yeah, it just makes it sound ridiculous in terms of like, you know, the attack. And I don't like sustain in my kicks. I like my kicks to be short and punchy. So that's what I was going for there. And then one of the biggest things that I do is I side chain it to soothe on the 808 bus. So one thing that people don't like, this is a great plugin first of all, but one thing that people don't actually know about this plugin is that you can sidechain stuff to it, and it'll duck down the frequencies where it's detecting that there's some sort of like a conflict happening. So like, check out what's happening. You see how it's ducking down this kind of like low end where like the kick is happening in the bass. So that's how you get your kind of like, you know, your elements to play well in the mix together, is by doing things like this, where you side chain it and you kind of get it so that it's like, you know, ducking those frequencies down when that element's there. So another thing that I do actually is that I have an invisible kick. This is an EDM trick for sure. Like, I have an invisible kick that's actually going to the reverb on the snaps, and this kick isn't actually doing anything other than, you know, I have you know, my snap sound, so it's like, yeah, you can see it. Like, so listen to the snaps and you'll be able to like actually, you know, hear that where that invisible kick is ducking. It's not ducking it down on every single note. You'll hear that it'll let it play, and then there's two kicks that happen that kind of create that sort of like pumping sound in the reverb. So check it out. And that really adds that kind of like movement to the reverb, and that kind of creates it has that space, but it also has a little bit of pumping to it, which is really cool. I love the fact that I got into EDM before like pop and other stuff, because like you pick up so many cool tricks just from paying attention to that, you know. So with my claps, So all I have, I went into this in the production video, but I just have like multiple claps happening, and I just have like, a little more top end, a little bit of 10K out of it just to give it some more crispiness. Then I have an API 2500, just kind of like compressing it, not too fast of an attack time because I do want that to have some attack to it, but it's compressing it just to make things a little more even sounding. Yeah, just evens them out nicely. And then I'm sending it to a reverb. So this reverb is obviously quite ridiculous, and that was the point. So I have here an R-verb, and I'm taking out the low end because we don't need low end, taking out the top end because like it's going to be way crazy just based on the clap sample. The clap samples themselves are really heavy in the top end, so I don't want the reverb to carry that on because it's just going to clutter up the mix with all this like brightness that it doesn't need. And then I took out more with the reverb. And then, that kick situation that I just explained. So yeah, going back to the reverb a little bit, it's a really long reverb time. It's like 3 seconds long. Normally I would never do a reverb time this long, but obviously like this is an example in which case like the reverb has to be like a little ridiculous to get the point across. So it kind of decays, and then right as like the next one's about to come, that's when it's over. So that's kind of what I was going for. So I went into this in the production video, but I have these like clicks and clacks sounds, and they are basically just like random sounds that kind of like, they're clicks and clacks, I guess is the best way to describe them. But like, yeah, the way that I actually mixed these is that I have them kind of like going to this bus, and then on the bus, first thing I have is an EQ, cutting out unnecessary low end from that, because obviously like you don't need it, and then just a compressor. The attack time is not too short because, I want my attack time to be, I want my attack time to be slow enough that like those transients get through, but it also like, pulls the sound in and compresses it a little bit. So yeah, not too fast of an attack time. And then I got my smack attack. So the smack attack is the biggest thing with percussion elements. Like, it's, again, transient shaper just kind of adds a little bit of attack to stuff. And here I went with a little bit of a sharper option because it gives you 3 options here. So I went with something a little bit sharper, a little bit less, duration. And I had it clip on the output so that it would actually give it, a little bit of like distortion if it goes above. And that kind of adds a little bit more character to it. So I also brought the sustain down a little bit. It also evens it out, in my opinion, because it kind of like, brings out every sound. Obviously, not every sound is the same volume, so it brings everything out and kind of lets it all pop in the mix. So a really big sound with this original song is the taiko drums. These drums right here. So these are huge sounding, and the reason they're huge sounding is for a few reasons. The reverb is crazy, and so I'm going to walk through this plugin chain. So this thing's obviously adding more volume to it. There's no way to, I'm not gonna lie, there's no way to like properly gain stage using the UA version of this. So, but it really just kind of like, compresses it and really juices them up, And then after that, I wanted to add more body to the mid-range. I wanted these to be nice and beefy sounding. So I actually, added a lot to the mid-range using an EQ and cut out everything like unnecessary, obviously. In the low end, like sub especially. And then after that, I added this Pultec, and I just boosted and attenuated. So like this is the thing with this EQ is that you can boost and attenuate, and that's like one of the best things about it is that you can kind of like get a cool sound out of like doing both. So like that's kind of what I was going for. Like watch, if it's just boosting, it's like too muddy. But if I boost it and attenuate it, it kind of just like boosts it, but also brings it down. I don't really know how to describe it. Boosts it, brings it down, but in like almost like different areas in different ways, so that it still kind of like adds harmonics to it without actually like, changing the character of the sound in a way that doesn't make sense. So yeah, after that I have another fab filter, just kind of like taming some of that stuff that I added a little bit, making it a little bit more friendly. And then C4 doing that, but on a bigger, more intense level. I kind of just took down, I guess, some of that stuff. One thing that I do is I kind of like, I choose to like even my sounds out, and then after that I bring things down as a whole so that like, my frequencies are even sounding, but they're also like, tucked in so that nothing's poking out too much. So yeah. And then I use this sort of like upwards compression MV2 to bring out some of those like lower level sounds and also compress some of the higher level ones. So you can kind of see that it's like, compressing up the low level sounds and compressing down the higher level sounds. So that's cool because it kind of like does this and it kind of like, evens things out even more. So yeah. And then of course, like, smack attack, adding more smack to everything. Yeah, smack attack does make things louder, but I mean, it definitely adds more like, attack to a lot of those hits, which is nice. I actually think that's it for this part of the arrangement. The next section of the song is super saturated with all these different synths and all these different elements, and it was kind of a challenge to get them to all fit together. So I'm gonna kind of like, play a section of the song and then show you how I achieved that. Yeah, so obviously there's so much happening in that section. So basically, like, I'll start with, some of these other synth sounds because I've been covering, drums and hi-hats and things like that. Or not hi-hats, but, other elements for the rest of the song. So the first thing I'll talk about is kind of like all these like LFOs and stuff. So these sounds are actually, I try to produce these sounds in a way where they're actually like, sounding pretty decent, before you even mix them. That's kind of like the point of like, a lot of sound design is to make stuff sound good. So, a lot of this stuff, like I don't actually do a whole lot of just like, just compress stuff with like, R comp on a lot of this stuff, some of these things have imagers on them to make them a little bit like wider and a little bit less, wide in the, in the low end, kind of just like take out some width here and then add some more width here. Cause you do want those sounds to be as like spread out as possible, especially with these like, like trancey sounds. So yeah, there's an imager on that. The biggest thing worth going into with this kind of like, with all these trancey elements is that I have them all going to a trance bus. And in that bus, I have some mid-side EQ happening where I'm bringing out the sides. I'm bringing out the top end and the sides, and I'm taking out the top end from the center because there are some things in the center, like, the vocal chops and some of the main elements that, don't need that top end as much. So I kind of wanted to like add some spread to that. So. You can really hear how the top end gets brought up. Not only does it get brought up, but it gets brought up in the sides, which is crucial there. So, yeah, after that, I just have this that kind of brings out some, it looks like it brings up 100 hertz a little bit and takes that out a little bit. Probably just wanted to add some like warmth to it. And then brings out 200 because I actually did want a little bit more mid-range out of my mix. So that's why I brought out the 200 in these. Yeah, because having enough mid-range is so crucial. Yeah, a lot of these other sounds, I honestly just kind of like EQ'd, and that's all I did, it looks like. Hold on, wait. So obviously this arrangement is really dense and there's a lot happening, but the kick still has to poke through. So one thing that I do is I pretty much have a lot of stuff, including some of the basses, going to like a synth side chain. So what this is, a compressor, and what's happening is that this compressor is actually getting fed the kick drum, and then the kick drum is actually causing these, like, this, everything that I'm sending to this bus is getting ducked down by the kick. So if you watch it, Obviously, like I didn't want it to be too noticeable, and in retrospect, I probably would have made this release time a little bit faster. You can see how like, you know, it's ducking things down just very slightly, because the more you like, you know, duck things down and make a little bit more room for your kick drum, the more headroom you'll have later on, and the less likely you are to like, you know, clip or like distort when you're mastering. So that's kind of like, you know, big thing that I do is just like, you know, instead of having like 30 compressors on everything, I just like send everything to a synth sidechain bus, and then just like, you know, send the kick to compressor on that, and then I'm compressing everything. I'm going to talk about these really boomy toms. So this is what these toms sound like. Like those toms sound so big, and the reason why they sound so big is because I'm actually you know, compressing the piss out of them with this like CLA 76. Yeah, so I'm just compressing them to all hell with like literally the all setting, and as you can see, they're just getting destroyed. And that's a big part of how I got this like these toms. Like here's without it. Like I don't care about those toms. Now I care about those toms because like they're just ridiculous sounding. So CLA 76 on the all setting has its place, and it's with those tom sounds. You know, toms especially, you know, even if this was in parallel, it would do the trick. So that's basically how I got that to sound, you know, like that. And then so I have several different reverbs happening, and I have them based on, you know, different reverb times. There's this song, like I said, this song's 7 minutes long. There's so much happening. So like, you know, not every reverb, you know, there's no way I was going to get by using just one reverb. So as you can see here, I have my reverbs, you know, named based on like the amount of milliseconds. So I have like a 1.5, a 2.5-ish, and then a 3.5-ish. And basically, you know, based on the different sections of the different songs, based on the different elements, I have certain things going to certain reverbs. So like, for example, like if you go to this section right here, like right before, you know, the sample comes in, it's like... So the reason that sounds so epic is because I have a 3.5 second reverb on the taiko drums, and that's how I got that to sound so like ridiculous when it goes into that next section. It's because you just watch the fader on this little reverb, and then know that like the taiko drums are going to this. That is like how you like, you know, create that sort of like dramatic contrast, is just having like a long reverb on something like, you know, ridiculous like taiko drums. So obviously like a 1.5 millisecond reverb, you know, was not, or a one, you know what I mean? Like, you know, 1.5 second reverb would not cut it on, you know, all those sounds. So I just have like, you know, different things going to different reverbs. The key here though is that they're all halls. So they're all kind of like the same, like, you know, species of reverb, which really kind of helps with like not having things be too cluttered sounding. And then I have a different thing here. I think I have like an echo verb happening for certain elements, and that's like the snaps. So I have like a specific reverb for specific elements. And then I have like, you know, different lengths of the same reverb for similar elements. And that's how I kind of like structure that. And then I have sidechain compression happening from the kick. So I have all my reverbs going to a reverb bus, and then I have like my kick going to a compressor on that reverb bus. So you'll be able to see it if I picked a part that made sense. So the kick is ducking all the reverbs down. So that's what I did there. So the piano sound was obviously like, you know, a huge part of this song, and I really wanted to make sure that I got it right. So there's probably more processing than I normally would do on a piano, but that's because like, you know, the piano is solo for like, you know, a significant part of the song. So I just wanted to make sure that was right. It's the Giant. It's like a contact library, but what I have is I have an EQ, virtual tape machine, adding some like warmth to it, so that's really good for that. A little bit of a tone shaper, it looks like, adding some more high mids to it, so a little bit more of that. And then neutron, adding some... Oh, okay, so I'm adding some transient shaping to the top end because some of those hits are really just like, you know, really aggressive, so I wanted to like I guess bring that Yeah, I'm bringing the attack down on some of that top end because of those hits. Then I have this, you know, Pultec. What is this doing? Yeah, I have the Pultec kind of like, you know, dipping out 200, it looks like, just to kind of like even out the mid-range a little bit. And then I just have like, you know, this EQ reacting to a lot of that mid-range so that, you know, it doesn't get too crazy, because this piano also comes in different parts of the song. So if I have like too much mid-range just build up from everything, then it's gonna get too cluttered in the mid-range. So, and then I have a reverb on the piano, which is so unlike me. I actually am a little suspicious right now. Is this on in the rest of the parts? All right. So I guess I remember what happened actually. Like, I tried sending this to its own reverb bus and it just wasn't the same. So like, you know, there are some cases in which like you'll find that putting a reverb directly on something, like a dedicated reverb, will actually like, you know, it's almost like it buries the sound in like a good way. So, you know, it puts the piano in a space, you know, without necessarily having it be dry first. You know, a lot of things, like I want them to be dry first, which is why I send them to the reverb, which is kind of like a weird way of explaining it. But in this case, like I didn't want any, you know, I thought the piano would be in the mix a little bit better if I just like put the reverb directly on it. Yeah, just to maintain the sound I had originally when I had no idea what I was doing when I was mixing. But I got the reverb right on the piano, so I was just like, if it's not broken, I'm not gonna fix it. And then I have a piano bus that has Soothe on it, just taking care of some of these other frequencies. Let me go back to the piano section. Yeah, Soothe kind of just taking care of some of those other frequencies. My last line of defense, actually, just another fab filter taking care of some of these, like, you know, either mid-rangier or boxier instruments, frequencies, I mean. And then another compressor, just, you know, taking down some of those transients just a little bit. And then my last line of defense reverb, which is taking care of some boxiness. Yep, and that's the piano sound. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to talk about these vocal chops. So these vocal chops are quite ridiculous. They're in a filter for most of the song, but in some cases they are not. Like in this sort of like second drop, they're just like ridiculously just there. So what I do here is I actually, like, you know, have them going to a vocal bus. I call it Vox. I don't really like with a U and an E at the end. So I'm going to walk through this vocal chain and give you guys an idea of like how it's actually structured. So a big thing with this is that there is a ridiculous amount of delay and a ridiculous amount of reverb. And, you know, these things are being compressed as well, like this. I'm pretty sure it's sending to the delay and then it's sending to a compressor on the delay that is, you know, ducking it down so that it's actually like not, so that the effects aren't like overshadowing the vocal itself. So that's kind of like, yeah, how I have this. How I'm kind of like, you know, keeping these things in check is by, like, you know, I send it to there and then I send it to plugins that sort of like side chain, like a multiband compressor, like I said, to duck it down when the vocal is present, and a multiband and an EQ that's ducking down the middle channel. But the effects on it are still pretty heavy. So Isotope Trash is what gives it a lot of its like distortion. Actually, let me cover this EQ. Make sure I cover this. So the first EQ, just right off the bat, just really like bitey frequencies. You know, vocals are bitey in nature, and vocal chops are also, you know, going to be bitey. So I have that, and then I have Isotope Trash that's just giving it, you know, just a very small amount of like the Isotope Trash is a great plugin. It's so heavy though, so I have it like just barely up a little bit, and it's kind of just adding a little bit more just distortion. It looks like I'm adding like whatever this is busted, and it's just like, you know, probably fucking it up. So that's why I have the mix like super low on it. But yeah, distorting the vocal chops, that's the takeaway from that. Then I have an EQ. I believe this is the EQ that's happening in the rest of the song. Yeah. So this EQ, I have this EQ automated on and off. So like basically like when we get to this section, it's like then this EQ comes in, and vocal chops through a telephone filter are actually like it, to be honest, because like, you know, you don't always need all that top end, and it can be really harsh, and the low end can also clutter up the mix. So the reason why you hear these vocal chops in the mix is because they have this telephone filter. Like a telephone filter is a great way to get something to stick out in the mix without, you know, having to like do all this other crazy surgical EQ stuff, you know, so that kind of really lets it have a place in the mix, and even though the arrangement is pretty dense. Moving on with the vocal chain. So then I have RVox just like, you know, compressing it, because obviously we're gonna have to compress this. It's like crazy. Then I have Soothe, just bringing down some of that craziness. Already that's sounding a little bit better, like in terms of the harshness. Then I have CLA2A, adding more compression, just evening it out a little bit. That's actually doing a lot of compression, and I'm not surprised either, because now the vocal chops are sounding much more even, much less like pokey. So that's thanks to, you know, more compression. And then, so one thing that I do to kind of like even out different frequency ranges is I'll boost it, and then I will also attenuate it by like, you know, a few dB, so that it kind of like, you know, it just evens things out. Like if you watch that line, it'll kind of like stay around the center, but it'll be kind of like, you know, boosting it when it's not enough, attenuating it when it's too much. So that's kind of how you get a more even, you know, more even dynamics in certain frequency bands. Yeah, and then I have like a part 2 to this vocal chain. It's literally just like Vox 2 and just OTT, adding more multiband compression. Probably should have bypassed this stuff, but OTT adding more multiband compression. Yeah, you can't go too overboard on the OTT, or it'll like, you know, literally just like fuck up the sound. So I just have it on like 18%. And then I have MV2, that sort of like upwards compression, bringing up some of the lower sounds, and I guess that's actually all it's doing. Then I have my EQ taking care of more annoying stuff. Yeah, just like boxiness, and then there was a lot of brittle things happening with this vocal that I really had to. Like that, like, ew. I hate that. So these EQs are probably both doing the same thing. Yeah, so that's taking care of that stuff, and then this is just more. Yeah, sometimes you'll do a lot of work, and then you'll listen to it in the mix, and you realize it wasn't enough, so you'll have to do more. So that's probably what happened here. And now when you hear it in the mix, it's a lot more in the mix. Versus... So that's before the plugin processing, and this is after. I think the main thing is that it's taming some of that warmth and adding more like, you know, top end to it, and also just like giving it more, just fitting it in a little bit better. So yeah, those are all the main elements in the mix. Like I said, like this you know, this arrangement is huge, so there's no possible way that I can cover everything, but these are kind of like the main elements, the main takeaways. And again, like this took me so long solely because there was so many elements in this arrangement, but, you know, I definitely think that I covered a few things of, you know, things that I do, things that I, you know, really found helpful. And there are a few things I actually learned in the process of mixing this song, because this is technically my first like original song as like this new music project under my own name. So like I learned a lot through just mixing this song. So yeah, I hope this was helpful, and please let me know like what you liked, what you'd like to see more of, what you want maybe clarification on. I'm happy to answer questions. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, all that good shit, and I will see you soon. And also, don't forget to listen to the song, because it is quite the journey, and I had a lot of fun making it. So that'll give you a much better picture of this music, as opposed to just like watching a tutorial on how I got it to sound the way that it sounds. So yeah, peace.